When most people picture winter survival, they imagine soldiers bundled in thick sleeping bags, wrapped in wool blankets, or huddled around fires. But during the harshest campaigns of the Second World War, many soldiers had none of those comforts. They were dropped into snow-covered forests, mountain passes, and open plains with only what they could carry on their backs. And yet, instead of freezing to death, they relied on a trick that required no sleeping bag at all, a method that still works today for campers, bushcrafters, and anyone interested in mastering the raw art of survival. During the bitter winters on the European and Eastern fronts, temperatures regularly plunged far below freezing. Supply lines failed, winter gear went missing, and sleeping bags, if issued at all, were heavy, soaked easily, and were often abandoned on the march. In places like the Ardennes, during the Battle of the Bulge, frostbite claimed nearly as many soldiers as enemy fire. To stay alive, troops turned to old fieldcraft improvised techniques passed down from earlier wars. One of the most effective was something known as the ground bed trick, a way to stay warm by insulating the body from below. Soldiers discovered that heat wasn't lost mainly through the air, but through contact with the frozen ground. A man lying directly on snow or ice would start shivering within minutes, no matter how many layers he wore. But by building a thick barrier between himself and the earth-using branches, straw, evergreen boughs, or even spare clothing, he could trap dead air beneath him, enough to survive the night. This simple method saved countless lives. Instead of hauling heavy sleeping bags, soldiers gathered what nature offered. They laid down pine branches in crisscrossing layers, 6 to 8 inches deep, until the forest floor became springy and insulated. Over that, they spread straw, leaves, or spare uniforms. When camping in groups, they often worked together to build wide, sleeping platforms, thick enough to block the deadly chills seeping up from the ground. Finnish troops during the Winter War against the Soviet Union perfected this method. Without tents, they built thick beds of spruce boughs, covered themselves with greatcoats, and endured nights that dropped to minus 30 degrees Celsius. Later, German soldiers on the Russian front copied these techniques, after learning that their standard-issue blankets were useless against the cold. The sleeping bags of the 1940s, heavy, canvas-covered, and prone to moisture, often froze solid overnight if a man had sweated during the day. The ground bed trick, by contrast, used renewable materials that could be refreshed daily. If the boughs became damp, new ones could be cut. It was lightweight, adaptable, and always available. The insulation came straight from the landscape itself. Even today, the same technique holds its value. A good modern sleeping bag might cost hundreds of dollars, but a proper ground bed can be built in less than an hour, with no equipment at all. The soldier's trick was never about comfort, it was about survival. It targeted the single biggest danger, heat loss through the ground, known as conduction, and solved it with nothing more than skill and effort. To recreate this method today, start by never lying directly on snow or frozen soil. If possible, clear the snow until you reach solid ground. Then lay down a base of logs, bark, or large branches as your foundation. On top of that, stack layers of evergreen boughs or dry grass, alternating directions to trap air pockets. Keep building until the bed feels springy and raised at least the width of your hand from the ground. Use a poncho, tarp, or outer layer of clothing as a cover, and always keep your inner garments dry. If you're with others, build your beds close together. Shared body heat can make the difference between a miserable night and survival. This soldier's trick isn't limited to winter. In damp or swampy environments, a raised bed keeps you out of moisture and prevents trench foot. In the desert, it can protect against contact with scorching sand that drains body fluids overnight. The brilliance of the technique lies in its simplicity and adaptability. It was born from necessity, but its principles are timeless. For those who study history, understanding how soldiers endured such brutal conditions without modern gear offers a deeper respect for their resilience. They weren't just fighters, they were thinkers and problem solvers who turned the environment itself into an ally. And for today's survivalists, these lessons are still practical. Gear can be lost. Tents can tear batteries can. But knowledge weighs nothing. The soldier's ground bed method proves that survival depends less on equipment and more on applying timeless principles. Heat always moves from warm to cold, so insulate beneath yourself. Moisture drains warmth faster than wind, so keep clothing dry. And a group always shares heat better than one person alone. These truths haven't changed since the snowy forests of wartime Europe. So the next time someone insists that a high-end sleeping bag is the only answer to cold weather, remember the soldiers of World War II who endured entire winters with nothing but coats, pine boughs, and determination. Their method insulating from the ground up remains as effective now as it was then. Whether you're a camper, a prepper, or just fascinated by history, this simple trick is a lasting reminder that real survival isn't about gadgets, it's about understanding nature and working with it. If this story gave you a new appreciation for how soldiers turned hardship into ingenuity, be sure to share it with others who value practical knowledge and the lessons of the past. Keep the wisdom alive on. Remember, sometimes the oldest tricks are still the best.